I lured Walt Borneman down from Estes Park again. And this is the third time that Walt has spoken to us over the last 5, 6, 7 years. We're trying to figure out when. But his two other books, The Admirals and then also MacArthur at War, he's spoken to us about those books. And we also poached his wife to speak to us a couple of years ago about wildflowers. So I go to Estes Park whenever I'm desperate for speakers in here. Walt has an undergraduate degree from Western State, and unbelievably, it's in history. He also has a law degree from the University of Denver. In addition to a dozen books, his commentary has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and he's also known as Colorado Mountains as the co-author of A Climbing Guide to Colorado 14ers. So Walt's going to talk to us about the book I've been telling you about for weeks here. So come on up, Walt.
Thanks, JD, very much. Yes, it's nice to be here again. I think, and my memory is a tad foggy, but I think it's probably been almost 10 years since I was here to speak about admirals. And I guess about the only other introductory comment I'd make with hearing about all of those finds, there's a spring theme to it, but my goal today is to get back to Estes Park before the reported 1 to 2 feet of snow falls. I can tell you, and you'll hear more about this, I'm sure, in the water program, there's more snow in Rocky Mountain National Park than I've seen in at least 30 years. So that's all good for water. What that means in terms of melting all at once, who knows? Well, we are going to talk about Brothers Down, and this is a very different book than I have written in the past. I think there's no question that December 7th, 1941 is one of those most traumatic events in US history. 2,400 American servicemen were killed in that surprise attack. And I think that December 7th has really become a generational marker as well. I mean, I look out here and I know I'm not the only one who can remember November 23rd of 1963 with the Kennedy assassination, and almost all of us, except the students, being able to remember 9/11. So that's what it felt like in 1941 for basically our parents' generation. I've got to admit that standing on the deck of the Missouri, which is a big battleship now anchored at Pearl Harbor, and contemplating writing The Admirals, which I did, I really did not have the vaguest idea that there were 38 sets of brothers on the USS Arizona that morning. There were a father-son, there were 2 trios of brothers, so that came up to a total of 78 men out of a ship's complement of 1,500. And tragically, the death toll in that approached an 80% casualty rate. So this became, for me, a far more emotional story than I would have imagined in the beginning. And before we look at slides, Carl, let me just share with you a couple of reasons why this book is different. I mean, I've written about the admirals, as JD mentioned. I've written about MacArthur, this controversial general. I've written about major wars and expansionist president, James K. Polk. But these men who all gave their lives on December 7th of 1941 were really the rank and file. It was on their shoulders that so much of these broader strategies, it was a tragedy, but strategies, basically came to pass. And what I learned from their stories is that frequently their goals were very personal, and their goals really, other than writing to girlfriends back home, was really to just survive until the next sunrise. This book is also different in terms of the research. I think we've talked in previous times here, how I do my research and where. And sure, for the admirals, I sat down at the Library of Congress, Naval War College, that sort of thing. I was really going, in this particular case, to individual families. And I was absolutely amazed at two things. One, their willingness to share with me what in many, many cases were pretty personal stories. And the second part of that is I was absolutely not ready for the fact that there was so much grief in those families. What are we talking about? 80 years after that particular event. And none of these people, of course, that I was interviewing actually knew the men who had been lost. In many particular cases, they were nephews or nieces or a granddaughter who basically reminisced and said, yeah, I always wondered why Grandma said play quietly because of Grandpa's nerves. Well, he was one of the few of the brothers' sets who actually survived. And even if those who did survive, 15 out of that 78, frequently came to what we now recognize today as post-traumatic stress syndrome and really were changed forever. And there were other people in those families who were changed forever too. Many are their stories of younger brothers who absolutely had to get into the service. One family in particular had a young man who, of course, lied about his age, tried to get in, and they found that out and sent him back home to the Murdoch family of Alabama, who you'll meet in just a second. The other two general comments I guess I'd make is how different 1941 was, and what this book really showed about not only brothers serving together, but also the state of the country at that point in terms of premonitions of war. Now, some of you know the story of the 5 Sullivan brothers who were on the cruiser Juno, which was sunk at the Battle of Guadalcanal, less than about a year after Pearl Harbor. Those 5 brothers were indeed serving together, but the inside story is that they joined up in order to avenge the deaths of Bill Ball and his brother on the USS Arizona. And at that particular point, brothers serving together aboard American warships, this is the 1930s, still before World War II, were basically thought to be pretty safe. And remember, if there's one theme to this, it's the economy. It's how poor everyone was at that point. If you had an older brother who went off and started to make $36 a month as an able seaman and was still able to turn around and send part of that back home. Lots of stories about these young men sending money home, pay for a younger brother's bike, pay for parents' new refrigerator, in many cases, just helping them put food on the table during the Depression. And at that particular point, these men are really motivated by a simple thing. It's a paycheck. It's a regular paycheck during the Depression. The second thing in terms of a premonition, I want to read what Bud Hite, I'll show you his picture in a second here, wrote to his girlfriend Donna. I found out that all of these men really expected war to break out sometime, somewhere. No one quite really realized how catastrophic it was going to be in terms of Pearl Harbor. But many of them did have this premonition that they were going into harm's way. Here's what Bud wrote to Donna. When I get my next leave and we're all back together, Bud wrote, let's not waste a minute of it because it may be the last time we get together. Now, maybe he shouldn't have said that, Bud continued, but you know as well as I do that we may be at war any day now. It will be hard for those we love and those who love us. All my love, Bud. Okay, Carl, can I just click here? Anywhere. Or do I have to point at you? All right. It turned itself back. How about if we just, I'm going to move back there anyway, and go ahead and advance to the next slide if you would. So this is really one of the characters in the book, the Arizona. Launched in 1915, 608 feet in length. I'm going to put that down there. 4 turrets of 3 14-inch guns each. When it was originally launched, it held about 1,000 men. And by the time of Pearl Harbor, there are 1,500 aboard. And that includes about 100 who are US Marines. Next, please. So this is the Becker family, 1930s Kansas. Look at the back row there, Wesley, Harvey, Walter, and Marvin, okay? Now, Harvey is a couple inches shorter, but he's actually the oldest. These are poor farmers in Kansas. It's the Depression. They've barely weathered the Dust Bowl. Harvey gets the farm, okay? And he sort of takes that over. What are the other brothers going, or excuse me, Walter gets the farm. And what are the other brothers going to do? Well, Harvey is in fact, joins the Navy, and the younger brothers see 2 things. One, they see him in uniform. That's a pretty good recruiting tool. And the best thing, of course, is that he's got a steady paycheck. So Harvey encourages Wesley on his left and Marvin to join the Navy, which finds them in November of 1941 at Pearl Harbor. Now, Harvey has been married, and he's able to spend more time ashore, so that's why he's in civilian clothes. But Wesley on the left and Marvin on the right. Wesley's kind of a foodie. There's stories, okay. Is kind of a foodie, and there's stories of him being the kind of guy who would take a hot dog, eat half of it, put the other half in his pocket for later. Marvin was really the shy kind. And there's a letter from him to his cousin at Kansas State, basically saying, boy, the Navy's okay, but I wish I was home with you. I want you to meet the Murdoch family of Alabama as well. Charles and Mary, these are the first 5 of their kids. Thomas in the back row left there is the first to join the Navy. And Melvin, and even though he's Charles Luther, he really went by Luther, they're going to follow in his footsteps as well. Look at the shoes. And it's a pretty proud family photo, but look at the shoes, and this is the poverty of northern Alabama. That's why 3 boys end up being in the Navy. Now, take a look at Melvin's shoes in the summer of 1941 at Long Beach. This is the last time that the Arizona makes port in its home port of Long Beach. 1940 Chevrolet, and Melvin has gone ahead and hit the big time and purchased that car. One of many family stories. What happened to the car? Nobody knows. Supposedly he put it in a warehouse. The Arizona went off. Melvin and his brother Luther are among the dead, as are 2 of the other family. And who knows what happened to the car. Well, very quickly, in terms of an overview, let's just look at Battleship Row, all of those battleships, Nevada, Arizona, Maryland, Tennessee, lined up there on the shores of Ford Island. This is the morning of December 7th, 1941. The Japanese first attack with torpedo planes that come in from Kate bombers from the west and from the east. And that's the first measure of attack. Okay, I got a trivia question for you. There's 8 battleships here, but there's 9 in the Pacific Fleet. Name the American battleship that wasn't at Pearl Harbor. No, think a little closer to home. He said Florida. Oh, Iowa? No, it's the Colorado. The USS Colorado is in dry dock in Bremerton on this particular morning, and that's why it misses out on the attack. The aircraft carriers, and we can talk about this in questions if you'd like, are not here because they're out on other missions. And of course, in the end of the day, that proves relatively important. All right, so those torpedo planes that come in from the east, that big shower of water there is basically the first torpedo hit against the battleship West Virginia. The West Virginia and the Oklahoma are moored outbound on the harbor side of this line of battleships, and they're going to take the brunt of the first torpedo attack. Now, we reverse a little bit, and you can see going from left to right. I'm going to name the ships for you. The one in the lower left is the Nevada. The next one in line inboard is, in fact, the Arizona. Anchored to it is a ship that's called the Vestal. It's not a combatant. I kind of call it the Ace Hardware of the Pacific. It's a repair ship. Everything that you needed to be done, you basically could get off the Vestal. And the Vestal at that point, again, interesting, with one brother on the Vestal and one brother on the Arizona are moored together. Well, the battleships ahead of that, West Virginia, outbound, and Oklahoma, the torpedoes are basically going to flood both of those. Oklahoma tragically rolls over and traps about 400 sailors. West Virginia, the executive officer, very intuitively, as soon as the torpedoes hit, has the order given to counterflood the ship. So the ship sinks, but it basically goes straight down rather than rolling over like Oklahoma. So let me tell you about the guys from Laguna Beach, Malcolm and Gordon Shive. They grew up, they really were the carefree lads of Laguna, and their buddy Weston Balfour, he spelled his name W-E-S-S. Weston Balfour, all three of them really just palled around Laguna. The Shives had a great life until their dad died. Again, it's the Depression. Mom remarried. Stepdad did not get along with two male teenagers. And Gordon escaped first. He basically joined the Marines. Now, as noted, there was a Marine detachment on the USS Arizona, and the Marines did a number of things, from providing security to running errands for the admirals, running the motor launches, and Gordon really came into his own as a Marine. Now, Malcolm wasn't quite as outgoing, and I don't want to tell stories on Malcolm, but his sophomore report card, you students I know are all A students, okay? Malcolm got a C- in woodshop, a D- in English, and somehow managed to get an F in auto shop. But like you were saying at the beginning, in terms of optimists and everything, Malcolm had his thing. He was interested in radio and became a radio man. And the Navy trained him even more, and he ends up together with his brother Gordon on the USS Arizona. Now, if I can juggle, I do want to read you one more thing. I want to read you a note that Gordon sent home to his girlfriend, Marge. And some of us in the crowd can remember the days before email and instantaneous communication, when it was kind of like, well, we sent a letter off, but we haven't heard. I wonder what she really thinks, or I wonder what he really thinks. And Gordon was ecstatic in November of 1941 because Marge he thought he was on the outs with her, but she had written him a pretty nice letter. Well, let me just read what Gordon writes back to her. "What's the matter? Am I poisoned?" Gordon asked Marge at the start of a letter written on November 2nd, 1941. Then he got to the heart of the matter. "I have heard that you and Harry had ideas of getting hitched." Marge's response, which has been lost, set Gordon straight. "Doggone, was I glad to hear from you," Gordon wrote back. He confessed that this was the second letter he had written to her in response, but that he couldn't bring himself to mail the first one. Pretty obviously, reading between the lines, probably a marriage proposal. So Gordon says, "I'll keep it till I see you again." Well, of course, tragically, Malcolm and Gordon are among the dead on the morning of December 7th, 1941. And the letter never arrived. I don't think it was ever posted. And with Gordon dead, Marge did in fact go on and marry Harry. Now, this particular photo was on a postcard. And what happened in those days is you got your picture taken with your buddies, they turned it into a postcard, and basically you could send it home. Well, Mrs. Lois Westgate, their mom, Laguna Beach, look at the USS Arizona postmark, 1 penny stamp. We've all heard about them. I'm not sure how many of us here have actually used them. And look at the text. Dear Mom, look who is all here. How's that for a reunion out here? Wes has left for squiggle line. Well, Gordon may or may not have known, but even if he had known and put it in there, it would never have cleared the censors. So it's just a squiggle line. So I don't know when I will be able to see him again. Letter following Gordon. And of course, this unfortunately was the last communication that the Westgate family received from Gordon, with both Gordon and Malcolm dead. Well, here's a survivor, Carl Buddy Christensen. He went on to become a sheriff in Kansas, lived to a ripe old age. His brother, Sonny, was a baker on board the Arizona, and Buddy is the newest member of the crew. He shows up only a couple of weeks before December 7th, and on the morning of December 7th, Sonny and Buddy are going to, they're dressed in their whites, they're going to go into Honolulu and have a photo taken to send home to their mom for Christmas. Well, just seconds, literally, before the attack begins, Buddy, being kind of the smirky younger brother, notices a dark spot and blemish, some dirt on Sonny's hat, and Sonny says, "Oh, I better go get a clean hat." So he goes back under the decks below deck to retrieve a hat, and of course, sad part of that story is Buddy never saw him again. Well, what happens? Notice the oil slicks on the ships to the right, coming out of West Virginia and Oklahoma. The Arizona at this point has still been largely untouched, but the next wave will bring bombers dropping bombs, armor-piercing shells that are going to hit the Arizona. Now, the Arizona anchored next to the Vestal, the Giovinazzo brothers. Joe's on the Vestal. He's going to survive. I met his son, gave me a lot of information that's in the book. Mike, on the right, his younger brother was on the Arizona and tragically died. The only thing more tragic and heart-rendering than that probably is the mix-ups in communication that goes back to their family in Silvis, Illinois. And at one point, the family doesn't know if both are okay. Well, they sort of think and get a report that, well, maybe Mike is okay. Mike tragically was not. And it's this horrendous explosion right under there in just a little bit left of center that basically destroys the forward part of the Arizona. 1,177 men died in that explosion. Well, here's Bud Hite, who had written that letter to Donna. You know, I met Donna's daughter, not Bud's daughter, because Bud died, but Donna remarried, and her daughter said to me what I think was true for a lot of families. Her daughter told me, you know, my mom lost the love of her life. She was never really the same after that. And yes, she married my dad and, you know, had a long life, but it just wasn't the same. And again, some of those stories, were they actually engaged? I started to write that. And Donna's daughter said, no, I'm not sure the family wants you to say that. We think that Bud might have had a ring, but we're not sure about that. So again, pretty personal stories. And then of course, what happens at Pearl Harbor is this search for survivors. And everyone thinks there might be another attack. There's not another wave that comes through. But today, the Arizona is still under the waves there. more than 40 people have, veterans who were on the ship have asked to have their ashes interred in the Arizona Memorial. I was going to tell you the story that of everyone who was on the ship, on the Arizona, we were down to 2 survivors out of that crew. But I thought before I came down here this morning, I thought, I better check on these guys. The 2 of them are over 100. And Ken Potts of Utah just passed away literally 3 or 4 days ago. So we're down to 1 man who actually, Lou Conter, who is from California, who served on the ship. So that's a story of brothers in arms, certainly, but brothers in blood as well. I do have some books afterwards if you're interested, and I would certainly be glad to take a few questions now. Yes, sir. The pictures that came from the air, I think those were actually American photos from, well, they were, early responses. I'm not 100% sure of that. The one from the west side may be Japanese. Yes, sir.
I don't know, a few months ago, I read a story, biography of Harry S. Truman. And he was the one who said, we're going to bomb Japan. And it was directly because of this event. He decided to try the atomic bombs, not on Europe, but on Japan. And it was payback.
Well, I don't mean to take exception to that. The story of Truman dropping the bomb is really a pretty complex one. Here's what I will say. There was, prior to 1941, a pretty strong isolationist element in the United States, divided whether we should follow Roosevelt onto the world stage or not. And within about 2 hours on the morning of December 7th, I think the Japanese attack probably unified this country more than any other event or rhetoric could have. Yes, sir.
What's the policy on brothers serving or family members serving together now, and when did that all change?
That's a great question, and it's a little bit frustrating to me because the short answer to your question is that I'm not sure. And it's not because I haven't researched it. Here's what happened in the war. After the 5 Sullivan brothers went down, the Navy said, "Oh, this is terrible. We can't have this happen again." And there was an order that came out that basically said you can't serve together. On the other hand, and think of, like, from the Army side, Saving Private Ryan, the Navy never went out ship by ship and said, "Okay, you're out. You got to do something else." They wouldn't let you apply and go to serve with your brother, like they actually encouraged pre-war. And to the best of my knowledge, talking to Navy JAG and everything else, there's no, it's frowned on today, but if there's a hard and fast rule that prohibits it, even among combatant vessels, I was unable to document it. One more question? If not, thanks so much. I'll try to get back up the hill before 2 feet of snow.